I'm talking today with thriller author Alan Petersen. Alan, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Glad to
So,
be here.
all right, thanks for coming on. I am going to read a little bit about Alan here, and then we'll get into our discussion. Alan Petersen writes high-octane thrillers. He was born in Costa Rica and raised there and in Venezuela. He moved to Minnesota to attend college and married his college sweetheart. They now live in San Francisco with 3 small dogs on a quintessential steep city street, 17% grade. You can learn more about Alan and his books on his website, alanpetersen.com, and the thriller Meet the Thriller Author podcast. Oops, I just closed that. Or interview authors of mystery, suspense, and thriller books, and that's at thrillerauthors.com. Alan, you sure don't sound like you're from Costa Rica and Venezuela.
Yeah, well, I'm a half-half. My mother's Costa Rican. My dad was from Minnesota, so I grew up speaking both languages. So I was kind of lucky in that, and that's the last name Petersen, which is very Minnesotan, not very Costa Rican. But I was born there, and I grew up there. I didn't move to the States till I was 19.
Wow. Nice. So today we are going to be talking about your favorite thriller. But first, why don't you tell us a little bit about you and your writing, not just your multinationalism?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've been a fan of thrillers for a long time, since I was a kid. And so when I decided I was going to try to write my first fiction book, I said, well, I like to read thrillers, so I'm going to try to write a thriller. That's what I did. So that's why I chose the thriller genre to write in.
Okay.
And I've been doing that now. Published my first book in 2013.
Okay. Is that a series?
It's a series. It's been very slow. Took a couple years off, but I have 3 out, and I'll have the 4th one out here hopefully by August of this year.
Nice. Yeah, we're recording this in May, almost June of 2019. So
Crazy.
Listeners are going to hold you to that and look for that next book in August.
Good. I need that. I need that accountability.
Right. Okay, so the book that you've chosen to talk about today is Eye of the Needle by Ken Follett. Can you give us a spoiler-free synopsis or a teaser about it? Just tell us a little bit about this book.
Sure. It's a great thriller. It's set during World War II, and it's set around real life events, historical events, which I thought was really cool when I first read it. And so it's basically chasing this Nazi spy and trying to stop him because he's got some secrets that could turn the tides of the war. So it's very, very fascinating read. And there's also a movie that was made in 1981 based on that book with Donald Sutherland. And I first saw the movie when I was a kid, and then later on I read the book. And of course, the book was better, as usual.
Yeah, I'm really hoping that the final Game of Thrones books will be better than how the series ended. No spoilers here, but I was not a fan of how the show ended.
Yeah, it's a little weird.
But we're not here to talk about A Song of Ice and Fire. You know, I don't think I've read this Ken Follett book. I did read his epic. What was the one about the building of the castle? What was that called?
Oh yeah, I don't remember the name of it, but yeah, it's like 1,000 some pages.
Pillars of the Earth.
That's the one. Yeah, he's got like 3 of them, I believe.
Yeah, I got the audiobook and it was like 40 hours, and I was not expecting to make it, more than a couple hours into it, but it was really gripping the way he could keep up the suspense over 11 or 1,200 pages was pretty impressive. So I'm gonna have to read Eye of the Needle.
He's one of the best writers, and like he writes the thrillers, and then he's like, oh, I'm going to write this historical literary fiction, and he puts those 3 out, and then he goes back to writing thrillers. It's an amazing talent, obviously.
Yeah, it's very kind of Stephen King that he just sort of writes whatever he wants and whatever genre, and people will just pick it up because of the quality of the writing, I guess.
Yeah.
So about Eye of the Needle, would you say that it's more character based or more of a plot based kind of book?
It's probably more plot based because, like I said, it's based on actual historical events, and so it's more focused on that. I mean, they're great characters in there, but it is more about the plot and trying to prevent the bad guy from getting away with what he's trying to do.
So is it more like a spy thriller or more like an action thriller?
It's a spy thriller. There's action, but it's more of a spy thriller. And it's following this Nazi spy who's embedded in England during World War II, and he has some information that he's trying to get to the Nazis, so they're trying to stop him. MI5, and he ends up in this island, marooned in this island with this young couple there, and so there's a whole dynamic there too. There's a little romance in there with the female protagonist there as well. So it's got a little bit of everything.
I've seen that when it comes to spy thrillers, which is already a subgenre, that there's even further subgenres in spy thrillers, that there's more like action-based spy thrillers, like the Robert Ludlum books, like the Bourne Identity series. They're very action-based, and then there's stuff like Jean Le Carré, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, which is a lot more heady and more about like maneuvering and the chess match of the spy game. Or like Red Sparrow was more like that kind of non-action. Like I don't think there was even a gunfight in Red Sparrow, if I remember. That was a thriller that came out a few years ago. They made a movie with Jennifer Lawrence that came out last year. I don't know if you saw that one.
Yeah, I've heard of it, but I haven't seen the movie and I haven't read the book either. But I remember the Jennifer Lawrence trailers for it or whatever when it came out.
The movie was okay. The book was really good, though. Yeah, that was a good book. So about Eye of the Needle, what is it about the plot that's so intriguing? What is it that makes it your favorite thriller?
Favorite. When you asked me about my favorite thriller, it was the first one that popped in my head. I have a lot of favorites, but it's hard to pick one. But It was the first one that popped in my head because it was just so well written. It's just the whole plot, and it's got a really the bad guy is fascinating character, and just how everything is set up. There's like a young couple that gets married, and everything they're like three different little stories. The bad guy, this young couple that got married in the beginning of the book, and then the police, the MI5 people and the police, and then everything just gets intertwined into this until a big confrontation in this island. So it's just the way he wrote it and how he tied everything in together. I just thought it was super cool, and just one of those you just had to keep reading how you can put it down. And so just probably his plotting and just the way and there's action also. I like action. I mean, I enjoy action books as well. Like Vince Flynn and those type of books as well. But yeah, you're right. They're very different. One is if you just want to go and see somebody kicking butt, and then the other ones are like more drawn out, and the action is a lot slower. But the payoff is also pretty cool.
Yeah. Can you tell us much about the villain in this book without spoiling it?
Sure. Yeah, the villain is that's probably one of the best parts of the book. When I first read that, that's when I was like, man, this is because villains are so important in thrillers because in a thriller you usually know who the bad guy is. You already know it's not a mystery, and so the whole purpose of the book is to stop the villain from doing what he or she is trying to accomplish. So this villain was really cool. He's codenamed the Needle. And he's known as a needle because he uses a stiletto to kill his victims when he has to. And so that right there was cool. Oh my God, it's like a cool weapon. Mm-hmm. And he's just he's a spy. He's a German spy, but he's posing as a British person. So he's kind of like embedded in England during that time, and so he's very charming and he's a handsome. So the women are fawning over him. And so he's kind of like a James Bond character, but then you find out that he's really vicious and cold-blooded if he has to be.
I think those are some of my favorite spy stories, and I don't know exactly which subgenre it fits into, but the stories where somebody's undercover, where somebody's having to go behind enemy lines or pretend to be someone who they aren't. Those stories are always just filled with tension, right? If somebody could be exposed at any moment and you don't know if they are or when or how it's going to happen. I think that makes for really interesting reading. You described this book as a page turner. Can you say why it's a page turner? Is there something specific about Ken Follett's writing style that makes you want to turn the pages?
Yeah, I think it's something that, as looking at it from a writer perspective too, trying to learn from the greats. He's very good at of basically every little chapter almost ends like in a little cliffhanger within the book. I mean, obviously there's no cliffhangers in this book or anything like that, but like so every chapter finishes, and then you're like, well, now you kind of want to find out what happens. You can't. It's hard to just put the book down and not think about it. And so that's something that really jumped out at me because there's been books that I've read that have taken me a month to get through, and then there's other books where it's like, wow, like I can't wait to get. You're thinking about it when you're not reading it. You're at work or you're doing whatever. You're like, oh, I gotta get back to that book. And so I think that's just the way he writes and how he makes every chapter leads into something else. So you're continuously trying to find out what's going on with the characters. I think that's what makes it so compelling and a page turner.
Yeah, there's a subtle art there to ending a chapter with just enough of a question to make you have to drive on to find out what happens next.
Yeah.
I remember in The Pillars of the Earth, one thing he did really well is that he would show the POV of... There were good guys and bad guys in that book, but it was also more about people warring for control of lands and who got to build the church. It's been a few years since I read it, but that's kind of what I remember. And he would show the POV of one person, and they would have a plan for how they were going to get the other person. Then he would switch the POV to the other person, and they had a different plan. And so the way they set it up was that you had to find out who was going to get to execute their plan and which one was going to work out, because then you as the reader knew more than the characters, and you just didn't know how it was going to play out yet.
Yeah, exactly. That's a lot of what he does in Eye of the Needle as well. And what's incredible too is Eye of the Needle, like I said, is based on historical events on the invasion of Normandy, the Normandy landings during World War II. So you already know the history part. You know how that turns out. However, in the book, if the needle gets to what he's trying to do, it would change the war. Well, you know how the war ended, but you're still like, oh my God, I hope he doesn't make it, So like allows you to suspend what you know. Historically, because the characters and the suspense is so good, you want to keep reading it to make sure that he doesn't reach his end goal, because then the Nazis are going to win the war, right. And we know that luckily that didn't happen. But when you're reading it, you're like, oh man, I hope he doesn't make it, So it's kind of amazing writing that lets you suspend reality.
Is it a standalone book, or is there a series attached to it?
I believe it's a standalone. Yeah.
Okay. So we've talked a lot about Pillars of the Earth, the other Ken Follett book. Have you read his other sort of, I know he has some other spy thriller kind of, or action thriller kind of stuff. Have you read his other stuff in this genre?
Yep, I usually stick to that genre. I actually haven't tried the Pillars of the Earth because, like I said, it's over 1,000 pages, but the audio, that's a good idea to listen to it on audio. So I haven't tackled that one, but yeah, I've read, Key to, I think it's called The Key to Rebecca, which is a great book. And then I've read like 2 or 3 other ones. I can't remember the other ones, but yeah, I've read several of his thrillers.
Okay, so here's a general question about thriller books. What is it that makes a thriller a thriller?
Well, I think like I mentioned a little bit earlier, in a thriller, you already know who the bad guy or the bad woman, you know who the bad person is. So what makes it a thriller is the story is trying to prevent the villain from accomplishing a goal that's going to affect the world. Think of like a James Bond, like the bad guys want to take over the world or destroy the world. In Eye of the Needle, he's trying to have the Germans win the war over the Allies, and so that's a big thing that you're trying to prevent. The good guys are trying to prevent, versus a mystery or a suspense or police procedural where it's more of trying to figure out who was the killer or the motivations behind the killing. So this one's more of a trying to prevent the bad person, the bad guy, from accomplishing his goal.
Yeah, and in the James Bond books, you usually meet the villain in the first few chapters because Bond will see him at a very expensive fundraiser wearing a tuxedo, or or an expensive martini bar.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
so
Eye of the Needle is the same way. You know, the villain Henry Faber is, you first meet him, he's like in the English countryside riding a bicycle. You know,
mhm.
hello everybody, you know, like all nice, and then then you find out later who he really is. But yeah, same thing. So yeah, in thrillers you know who the bad guy is right away,
Yeah,
and compared to like mysteries where the point of that book is trying to figure out who the bad guy is.
right. So, Alan, what book of yours do you want to talk about today?
Well, I guess my latest book on the series is Odd Jobs. I guess we could talk about that one. Published that last year, and it's a spy thriller as well. So as I'm a fan of that genre. Although mine probably tend to be a little more of like action packed, more like Vince Flynn style versus Ken Follett style. But I do try to put in a little bit of character growth in there and conflict and things like that. But yeah, they're more action oriented than these other books.
Tell us about your protagonist, Pete Maddox.
Well, he's in the first book, he's the station chief of the CIA in Venezuela. I grew up in Venezuela, so I'm always very interested in what's going on there. I lived there for the first 10 years of my life. And so what's been going on there in the last decade has always makes me sad because it's a wonderful country with great people. And so I've always been kind of fascinated about that. And there was a coup against Hugo Chavez in 2001, I believe. And so I kind of based it off on that. So kind of like with Ken Follett, who's influenced me, I based the first book on a real event, and then kind of fictionalized it, of course. But yeah, by the time the Odd Jobs comes around, it's been several years, and he's out of the CIA now and kind of working as a freelancer.
Okay, cool. So those books we talked about today, that was The Eye of the Needle by Ken Follett and Odd Jobs, a Pete Maddox thriller, book 3 by Alan Petersen. Well, Alan, thanks for chatting with me today about your favorite thriller. Is there anything else you want to say? Anything else we didn't talk about that you wanted to bring up? Anything that just came to mind that later you're going to go, oh, I wish I would have said that? Anything else
No,
sticking around back there?
It's probably going to happen anyway, but no, I can't think of anything. Thanks for having me on. I really any excuse to talk about thrillers and my favorite books is always exciting. So I really love the concept of your podcast.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Alan. Have a great day.
Thank you.